At 6, turbulent times ahead as the pressure on the UK's economy intensifies. With inflation now expected to hit 10% by the end of the year, the Bank of England raises interest rates to 1% and says they could rise again very soon.
We will have to come back in about 6 weeks' time and reassess all the evidence again. And because the situation is so unprecedented, that reassessment is particularly important because we're dealing with things that haven't been seen before.
And there are now warnings of a possible risk of recession. It comes as the energy giant Shell announces more than £7 billion in profits in just 3 months, a record rise. Rescuing civilians trapped in eastern Ukraine. We report on the volunteers, among them a British maths teacher, who are risking their lives to save people as Russia attacks.
I'm quite scared most of the time.
COVID has caused the deaths of almost 15 million people around the world, says a report by the World Health Organization, almost 3 times the number reported. And the return of royal garden parties after COVID, but Buckingham Palace says the Queen won't be attending this year.
And coming up on the BBC News Channel, the Europa League has a lot to live up to after a dramatic week in football so far. Both West Ham and Rangers are hoping to reach the final.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. Interest rates have risen to the highest level in 13 years as the Bank of England tries to curb soaring price rises. Rates have gone up for the 4th time since December, from 0.75% to 1%. Inflation, the rate at which prices are increasing, is also expected to hit more than 10% by the end of the year, the highest level for 40 years. It's being driven by rising fuel, energy and food costs, partly due to the war in Ukraine. And there's more bad news. The economy was predicted to grow next year by more than 1%. Now the Bank of England expects it to shrink by 0.25%, amid warnings of a real risk now of recession. Our economics editor Faisal Islam has the details.
Butter seems to be the biggest price impact.
In Nottingham, at this deli, they don't need a Bank of England forecast to tell them that inflation is surging in a way we haven't seen in a generation.
As much as you try to stop passing on the price rises, that's gone now. They're going up.
There's nothing we can do. We've just got to cut a cloth according to our means, and that's it.
Energy prices, as well as raw materials costs, are contributing to the Bank of England now predicting even faster rises in prices, with the headline rate of inflation forecast to hit over 10% by the end of the year. As a result, the bank's predictions for the economy are being slashed over the next 2 years, with the economy forecast to shrink next year. Outside the city centre is a tale of 2 types of vacancy sign. Jobs vacancies showing a strong employment market, but vacant commercial properties showing an economy yet to fully recover from pandemic lockdowns, now facing another black cloud.
I'm going to give it this year to see if it picks up any. If not...
You're going to give up?
Well, I've got to think twice. I can't keep living on my savings.
What's starting to become clear in the data now is that the cost of living squeeze, those rising prices impacting upon disposable income, well, that's starting to have its own impact on the economy generally, with some fearing the economy starting to shrink and that word recession starting to rear its head. It seems to be a combination of a recession-style situation with very high inflation, what they used to call stagflation, appearing this year.
Yes, I mean, we are in a very difficult position at the moment, and I've used this analogy quite a bit, and I'll use it again. We're walking a very narrow path now between, on the one side, inflation, which of course is far higher than it should be and we want it to be, and on the other side, because we're being hit by very big external shocks, which are largely causing the inflation, but are so big that they're causing a big loss of real income to people and businesses in this country.
There's a bit of a jump there and a huge jump in the gas.
A few miles away in Long Eaton, Jay has just had the news about a £1,600 a year increase to energy bills for the 3-bedroom semi his family own. Direct debits already increasing by phenomenal amounts.
You have to make adjustments. Obviously, we'd like to do more events and holidays and whatnot, but we're sort of having to rein that in.
And like millions of households, cloth is having to be cut according to these circumstances.
Not using the tumble dryer because that just canes the electricity. Stopped using tumble dryer? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, we've not had it too bad with the weather. Yeah. And so we've been able to obviously dry outside, and we do as often as you can. Yeah. And they're the real, and making sure we're turning things off, even like the TV from standby. I mean, they're small amounts, but over the year it's going to add up.
And yet the answer to the inflation seen on energy meters is a further squeeze on household mortgage costs, with the Bank of England raising interest rates to 1%, the highest level since 2009. Rates up, even as it warns of recession, as the bank walks the trickiest of tightropes.
And Faisal is with me now. Given that a lot of the inflation is being driven by external factors like the war in Ukraine, is raising interest rates actually going to make that much difference?
Well, it's exactly the question I put to the Governor. In an ordinary situation, rates would go up to temper inflation because you've got a booming economy. That's not the situation right now. And so when you put that to the Bank of England, what they say is there's not much we can do, really, about inflation hitting that 10% mark at the end of the year. What we're trying to do is avoid people and businesses trying to set their wages and their prices, assuming that 10% will be there the year after and the year after that, because then the inflation starts to generate in and of its own accord. So they want to stop that. That's what this rate rise is about. But certainly, and that's why some on the Monetary Policy Committee that sets this, there were 3 votes for an even bigger rate rise of 0.5%. But when you put it all in the mix, we've seen a reaction in markets today. Sterling's down by about 2%. And what that shows to us is that people think that rates, while they will go up further, they might not go up as far as we thought they were. So maybe more like 2%, but not 2.5% or 3% when this rate rises are over and done with.
Faisal Islam, thank you. Well, as energy prices and bills continue to surge, the energy giant Shell has announced record profits of more than £7 billion for the first quarter of this year. The figure has nearly trebled compared with the same period last year. Our business editor Simon Jack reports.
Pernis near Rotterdam, Europe's biggest refinery, owned by Europe's biggest energy company. Never in its 115-year history has Shell made more money than it did in the first 3 months of this year.
Shell made underlying profits of £7.2 billion in the first 3 months of this year alone. That's triple the amount they made in the same period last year. How come? Well, the global price of oil, already high at the end of last year as the world economy emerged from its COVID slumber, surged again on concerns that the conflict in Ukraine could see Russian oil supplies disrupted or boycotted. Similar story for gas. The price smashed records earlier this year. Remember, Russia is the world's biggest exporter of gas, and Europe is its biggest customer.
Those global prices have been reflected on UK forecourts and in UK energy bills.
So what is Shell going to do with all that money? Well, in the first 3 months of the year, it gave over £4 billion to its shareholders, which, remember, include millions of UK pension savers. But it's also promised to invest up to £25 billion in the UK over the next decade, mainly on renewables and low-carbon technology, but some new oil and gas to help improve the UK's future energy security.
The government has so far resisted calls from opposition parties for a windfall tax on oil and gas profits. Simon Jack, BBC News.
President Putin has called on Ukrainian troops holed up in the steelworks in the city of Mariupol to surrender. It's the last stronghold of Ukrainian resistance in the city, and around 200 civilians are also thought to be sheltering in its underground tunnels and bunkers. The commander leading Ukrainian troops holed up inside says difficult, bloody battles are being fought. Russia has also been bombing other cities in the region as it tries to secure more territory in the east of the country. This report from our Eastern Europe correspondent Sarah Rainsford contains flashing images from the start. They struck in the dead of night. And here's what they hit. The air raid sirens still wailing as daylight revealed the destruction.
Look, my house.
Russia talks about its precision missiles and military targets. It never admits to any of this. But every day, more lives in Ukraine are shattered. This is Kramatorsk in the east. Lyudmila says a wall collapsed. She was buried in rubble in her own bed. Hours earlier, more people had finally reached safety from Mariupol, the port city besieged for weeks that's now under Russian control. Apart from its steelworks, Ukrainian fighters are still holding out here. They say civilians, even children, are still trapped in bunkers. One of the commanders has made a new call for help to evacuate the civilians as well as wounded and dead soldiers. Ukrainians are following their fate closely, especially in places like Bucha, which survived its own nightmare. Russia's war on Ukraine has destroyed businesses, it's ruined houses, and it has wrecked lives. And here in Bucha, even a month after the Russian troops were forced back, people's horror stories of life under occupation are still spilling out. There were queues for food at the local scout hut because many lost everything in this war. Galina tells me Russian soldiers stole all her savings, even her granddaughter's jewellery, while the family cowered in fear in their vegetable cellar. In Moscow, Russian troops are rehearsing their annual Proud Parade. All this to mark Soviet victory in World War II. Whilst in Ukraine, their shells are hitting playgrounds and apartment blocks. Sarah Rainsford, BBC News, Kiev. As Russia intensifies its attacks on eastern Ukraine, many thousands of people are trapped in horrifying conditions. Our correspondent Andrew Harding reports on the volunteers, among them a maths teacher from Britain, who've been going in and out of towns to try to rescue people, putting themselves at huge risk.
They sit in stunned silence on the school bus that just rescued them from hell. Still weary with terror. 2 other buses with them didn't make it back. It was so scary, is all she can manage to say. Thousands here are running the Russian gauntlet, trying to escape from the Kremlin's new offensive in eastern Ukraine. But imagine escaping this and then going back in again and again. That's what a group of remarkable volunteers are doing here in the Donbass. Including the man who filmed this, a British maths teacher, Guy Osborne, who came out last month to lend a hand.
We've been going quite close to the front and evacuating quite a lot of bedridden people, a couple of blind people, people with Zimmer frames.
It's quite a risk you're taking.
I'm quite scared most of the time.
Who wouldn't be? This footage was filmed by the driver of another school bus, one of the 2 that went missing. Mikhail Pankov is a local history teacher. Last Friday, he left for a rescue mission and never came back. Then, a surprise announcement on Russian television. Mikhail has been captured alive. Then another surprise. While we're speaking to his wife, Yulia, her phone rings. It's her husband, still held captive, but calling with important news. He spoke about a prisoner exchange, she says. My husband said the Russians might swap him for prisoners held by our government. Soon, I hope. So maybe everything will work out. Perhaps it will, but for others still trapped in the town of Popasna, no help at hand.
This is as close as we can get to the town right now. You can hear the boom of artillery in the distance and some shells landing just the other side of this field. We've been told that all rescue efforts have now been suspended because of the danger, but that still leaves something like 2,000 civilians trapped in this town, and we're told many more civilians caught in other frontline towns.
All evidence of a slow, grinding conflict with no end in sight. Andrew Harding, BBC News in eastern Ukraine.
The COVID pandemic has caused the deaths of almost 15 million people around the world, according to the World Health Organization. That's almost 3 times higher than the number of deaths that have been officially reported. India is one of the worst affected countries. Our global health correspondent Naomi Grimley reports.
Mom has been the one we have looked up to. She was always a person who was happy.
The Dandanier family just before the pandemic started. Even after the virus began spreading in India, COVID still seemed remote.
Forget about corona, lockdown.
But in August 2020, family members fell ill one by one. And 71-year-old Yusha died in hospital.
We were shattered. We never thought that this could happen to her. Daily, I could see that she was slowly but surely deteriorating. I had to just tell her to keep going, try going on.
Yusha's death would have been recorded, but millions weren't. The WHO now thinks India's deaths were 10 times the official count. Russia undercounted too, with excess deaths at 3.5 times what was recorded. In the first 2 years of the pandemic worldwide, it was thought around 5.5 million people died from COVID. But because of patchy testing, poor record keeping in some parts of the world, and the fact that some people died of non-COVID causes during lockdowns, the World Health Organization now thinks that figure might be more like 15 million.
It's a tragedy. This is a staggering number. And we have to hold policymakers accountable. And if we don't count, we will miss the opportunity to be better prepared for the next time.
Brazil was at the epicenter of the pandemic for a while and saw deaths on a mass scale. Giovanna, a nurse from Sao Paulo, lost her grandmother, but had to carry on working rather than grieve.
Soon after, I had to work in the COVID ICU. The patients remind me of her because they were at the same age. They remind me of my grandmother.
Here, Britain had excess mortality rates above the global average. It was on a par with Germany, better than Italy, but not as good as France. A reminder that this pandemic was tough even for some of the wealthiest nations. Naomi Grimley, BBC News.
The time is just after 6:15. Our top story this evening. Interest rates have risen to the highest level in 13 years as the Bank of England tries to curb soaring price rises. And coming up, why these little chicks mean spring has sprung earlier than ever before.
Coming up in Sports Day on the BBC News Channel, Pep Guardiola promises Manchester City will rise again after their dramatic defeat to Real Madrid in the Champions League. Real will meet Liverpool in the final.
A BBC investigation has found hundreds of fake charity websites have been set up by scammers to profit from the war in Ukraine. Some of the sites steal details from real charities. We found one which had taken a video and logo from Save the Children. It has condemned the criminals behind the scams, saying they are stealing both from donors and from the vulnerable people who charities are trying to help. Angus Crawford reports.
Out of war, chaos. Ukrainian refugees needing shelter and safety. Feeding off the destruction, fake charity websites appearing all over the internet. Take this one. It looks professional.
The only problem is it's fake. There's no charity registration number, and as for the address of the head office, it doesn't even exist.
But there is a phone number.
I just wanted to ask you a quick question about what the money's being spent on.
There are many refugees, so for food, clothes, travel.
How long have you been going as a charity? So he's hung up on me, and like many of these sites, most of these sites, there's no evidence at all that any of the money is actually getting to Ukraine.
Here's another. It's stolen the logo of Save the Children and one of their videos.
So does this make you angry?
Yeah, it absolutely does. We've got the generosity of the British public, which is being taken advantage of. But then there's also the children that we work with around the world who are not going to get the support that they need because money is being taken away from the genuine good cause.
That's shameful, isn't it?
It's awful. It's awful.
But it's not only charities. This site copies one raising money for the Ukrainian army, stealing the profiles of fighters, like Tanya, who gets kit to soldiers on the front line.
It's worst thing which you can do person. Then in your country dying little children, in your country now all in fire.
So who's behind these sites and where are they? Take SaveLifeDirect.com. It says it's raised $100,000. It's registered to this man, Musa Ibrahim, who's in Abuja in Nigeria. It says it's raising money for Ukraine.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's not, is it? It's not raising any money for Ukraine.
We are trying to help the Ukrainians in net, you know.
Really? You say on your website you've already raised $100,000. And yet you're not a charity, and there's no evidence any of your money is going to Ukraine. He insists he is sending donations to Ukraine. But after we spoke, he took the website down. For Ukrainians, the war brings misery. For scammers, it's just another opportunity to make money. Angus Crawford, BBC News.
The mother of baby P, the toddler who died in 2007 after months of abuse, is set to be freed from prison after the parole board rejected a government challenge against her release. Tracy Connolly was jailed in 2009 after she admitted causing or allowing the death of her 17-month-old son Peter at their home in North London. Our Home Affairs correspondent Daniel Sanford joins me now, and this was an infamous case at the time, and clearly this has been a very controversial decision.
Many people remember the case of baby P, who suffered multiple injuries at the hands of his mother's partner and his mother's partner's brother. His real name was Peter Connolly, and Tracy Connolly, who admitted permitting the death of a child, was told that she would serve a minimum of 5 years in prison, but she wouldn't be released until she was no longer a risk to the public. Well, she was briefly released in 2013 and then recalled to prison because of concerns about her behaviour. 3 times since then she's asked the parole board to release her, and they've decided not to. But in March this year they decided it was safe to release her to a specialist hostel. The Justice Secretary Dominic Raab immediately asked them to reconsider that decision. A judge has now said the decision was correct, so she will be released, but not without him taking to Twitter and saying this shows why that the parole board needs a fundamental overhaul, and he thinks that in future the most serious cases should be checked by ministers.
Daniel Sanford, thank you. The actress Amber Heard says she was attacked by her former husband, Johnny Depp, because of her professional relationship with the actor James Franco. Taking the stand for a second day as part of a multi-million-dollar defamation trial in the United States, Amber Heard cast Johnny Depp as deeply troubled by jealousy and drugs. He's suing her over an article in which she said she was a victim of abuse. She is countersuing. David Sillito reports.
Day 2 of Amber Heard's testimony and a return to the witness stand to continue her account of her relationship with the man sitting in front of her, Johnny Depp, her ex-husband who's suing her for libel after she described herself as a victim of domestic violence. Her evidence began with photographs she'd taken to catalogue what she says was his drink and drug problems.
You know, there was no, just his employees and everyone who had been taking care of him versus my word. And so I started to take pictures to say, look, this is happening.
Addictions, she said, that led to violence.
And at some point, he just whacks me in the face.
She went on to describe a confrontation on a plane in which Johnny Depp is said to have accused her of an affair with the actor James Franco. She also made a recording of what she says is her ex-husband, out of control, howling on that plane. Another incident in which she says she was assaulted.
I feel this boot in my back. He just kicked me in the back.
Throughout it all, Johnny Depp listened head down. Even as they left court, there was no eye contact with the woman who he says was the one throwing punches in this relationship, not him. David Sillito, BBC News.
Millions of people have been voting in local elections across the UK today. People in Northern Ireland are choosing who will sit in the next Stormont Assembly. All councils in Scotland and Wales are being contested. In England, there are some mayoral elections and more than 4,000 seats in 146 local authorities are up for grabs. You can watch the results overnight on BBC One with Hugh Edwards. The Royal Garden Party season is about to get underway for the first time since the pandemic, but the Queen won't be attending. Instead, she will be represented by other members of the royal family. It comes as she prepares to celebrate her Platinum Jubilee in June to mark 70 years on the throne. Our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell reports.
Garden parties are a major fixed point in the palace's summer programme, almost always attended by the Queen. They're a way of recognising achievements by thousands of people from across the United Kingdom. Of course, there haven't been any garden parties for 3 years because of COVID. And now the palace has confirmed that the Queen won't be attending this year's garden parties. Once again, the reason being given is that they involve long periods of standing. They are simply too taxing for a 96-year-old. The last time the Queen was seen in public was the service of thanksgiving for the life of the Duke of Edinburgh at the end of March. She's missed a series of events that she would normally attend, the Commonwealth Day, Maundy Thursday and Easter Sunday services among them. The palace won't be drawn on questions about the monarch's health. However, she is still completing virtual engagements from Windsor. This was today, welcoming a new High Commissioner from St Lucia via video link. And according to the palace, she is still hoping to attend the state opening of Parliament next Tuesday, though a final decision, the palace says, will be taken on the day. Beyond that, the big question is how visible will she be for the Platinum Jubilee celebrations next month. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.
Spring has sprung early. In fact, over the decades, it has moved forward by 3 weeks. A woodland study looking back to the 1940s has found great tit birds in Whiteham Woods near Oxford have been laying their eggs earlier than ever before. Scientists who have special permission to access their nests are blaming climate change. Our science correspondent Victoria Gill reports.
Whiteham Woods near Oxford, a very special site of scientific interest. This year marks the 75th anniversary of the Whiteham Great Tit Project. Scientists have systematically monitored every chick hatched in the nest boxes here since 1947, and we're about to meet the newest generation.
Wow, how many are there? So there are 8. So that's a very standard size for a great tit. Yeah. Now these parents have got a lot of work to do. They've got to find about 10,000 caterpillars for these.
10,000 to get them to fledge?
Yep.
It's precisely because this has been a continuous study for all those decades that researchers have been able to see and to measure the change in the timing of spring here.
the 75 years that we've been studying the tits here, we've seen quite a marked shift in the timing of egg laying. So they're now laying about 3 weeks earlier. The tits here are actually managing to track the other members of their food chain quite well. So both the caterpillars and the eggs have also shifted their timing earlier. So the whole sort of food chain has shifted earlier in spring.
The woods were bequeathed to Oxford University by a wealthy local family back in 1942. Since then, they've been the site of dozens of different scientific projects. But the longest running is the Great Tit Study, which Chris Perrins has been involved in for more than half a century.
What are your reflections on the seasonal shift?
That's fine, unless it gets to limits where the trees or the caterpillars or the birds can't do that shift because it's too big.
And that's still a question
that is still a big question to answer and a very interesting one.
The work here goes on, and whenever spring happens, it's a busy season for the birds and the scientists. Because as our climate changes, these rare, decades-long studies that track exactly how the natural world responds become more important as time goes on. Victoria Gill, BBC News, White Wood.
Well, it certainly felt more spring-like today. Let's have a look at the weather. Nick Miller is here and it is finally warming up a little bit at least.
Yeah, so nothing too unusual for the time of year, though that might change for some next week. Today, the cloudier skies have been in Scotland and Northern Ireland. You may have seen a little rain, and that is a sign of things to come tonight. A weather front moving in, so we are going to see the rain turning heavier and more widespread, wettest in western Scotland, quite breezy with that too. Increasing cloud Wales, southwest England around the coast, misty, maybe drizzly by morning. A lot of clear skies in England. It's a milder start to the day tomorrow. And it's a day which has rain moving southwards along with this weather front here. It's a slow process, and either side of that, you may well see some sunny spells for a time. So initially the rain is in Scotland and Northern Ireland. It will slowly move away from you and you get the sunny spells following. Ahead of that, a lot of dry weather. The rain will move into Northern England, into Wales, the Midlands, quite misty around the coast of southwest England. The sunny spells lasting longest in East Anglia and the southeast before turning initially hazy, then clouding over, and this is where we'll see the day's highest temperatures. It will of course feel cooler where you have the rain. The rain continuing to move south tomorrow night, but weakening as it does so. There may be something half decent running into East Anglia, but in southern England where it has been so dry, very little at all, and it's gone by Saturday. And as high pressure builds back in, a lot of dry weather again for the weekend. Just a few showers on Saturday, parts of Scotland, northern and eastern areas of England, and a cooler feel to things around these northeastern coasts. And then by Sunday you may see a little rain in parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, but just a hint of things to come next week. Now, across northern areas, you may see little change, further rain at times, temperatures not changing too much. There is a chance the further south you are that you see some of the warmest weather of the year so far moving in. Though I have to say, that combined in areas where it has been so dry may not be to everyone's taste. Sophie.
Nick, thank you. And that's all from the BBC News at 6. It's goodbye from me on BBC One. We join the BBC's news teams where you are. Goodbye.